Mr. Binks, there's been quite a lot going on in the world of animals and the vet profession. So that's why we're jumping on Zoom now to speak to your old vet, a retired vet, Andrew Prentis, to get the latest. I'm Anna Webb. Welcome to A Dog's Life. Andrew Prentis, welcome back to A Dog's Life.
Thank you for inviting me again.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure that, you're coming on today because we've got a lot to talk about. Please, can we just touch on what's going on at the moment? This landmark investigation by a government body into the British veterinary profession.
Yeah, well, it came out of, there was concern, it's the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, and sort of did a pilot question asking really to try and figure out whether there were concerns about the way the veterinary profession was functioning, and they put it out to the general public, and to their surprise they got, I think it was about 58,000 responses, some of whom were clearly rather unhappy about their experience of the profession. So the CMA has announced now that they're going to do a rather more in-depth examination, and I think it's about many aspects, but some of it inevitably is going to be about charging and about transparency. I think this kind of investigation is not a bad thing, but I suspect it might be quite uncomfortable actually for elements of the profession. In my experience, the majority of vets, as I said to you earlier on, they just want to make the puppies and kittens better. But actually, we've got caught in an industry now which is much more of a sort of commercial operation than it ever was a generation ago. And the veterinary profession has changed out of all recognition, really, in the time that I've been in.
Well, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I grew up with animals, and our vet used to be like a farm vet, and he sadly died, actually. He caught TB from a cow. I mean, that's how I know. He was called JD, and he used to come to our house, It was very all creatures great and small. Yes. And of course, that was around the time, a bit later than that, landmark TV series obviously captured the nation's imagination and hearts about the vet profession being a vocation,
Yeah, and it was very much like that. I remember the first practices I worked in, and back in, I sound like a bit like an old fart at this point, but I mean, back in the day, the only person who could own a veterinary practice was a veterinary surgeon. They could not be owned by anybody else. And secondly, we were not allowed to advertise at all. And what happened is that the government, in their wisdom, looked at it at a certain point and said, well, that doesn't seem to be very fair, and that's possibly an unfair monopoly, not necessarily in the public interest, so let's open it up. And allowed non-vets to own veterinary practices. And the business community, so far as I can see, spotted that veterinary practices were changing hands for much less money than they would do if they were other types of business. And so the finance people moved in and said, right, we're going to start buying up veterinary practices because they can generate a profit. We can buy them for cheap. Fast forward 10, 20 years, and well over half of the veterinary clinics in this country are now owned by one of 6 large corporate veterinary groups.
Yes.
And the management teams, the boards of these groups are largely finance people. They're money people and business people, and so it means, I think both from the vet's point of view and the animal owner's point of view, it's different and not necessarily better. And the key thing in it all, of course, is it better or worse for the animals who are being brought into vet clinics?
Well, this is it. A lot of firms are bankrolled, aren't they? Whether it might be car manufacturing firms or anything really. But the issue here with this investment banking side of things is that you are not dealing with an inanimate object. You're dealing with an animal that's alive, it's sentient, and it's part of a family. And you're also, the thing that's interested me over the years with vets, they're very much yeah, we're vets, so we deal with animals. You know, we're not doctors. They deal with people, sure. But at the end of the day, you know, it's the human attached to the lead that is going to pay the bill, that
Yeah,
is going to perhaps one day have to go to pick up their dog from having a routine dental, okay, and have the devastating news delivered to them that we're awfully sorry, but your dog died in the surgical procedure. And they still have to pay for that, but leave without their dog.
right. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues tied up in that statement there. I mean, the reality is that, you know, anesthesia is not, you know, 100% safe procedure. You know, it's in the vast. I mean, most of us in practice, you know, we do hundreds, we do thousands of anesthesias, and it's absolutely devastating for the whole team if something goes wrong and we lose a patient, and we go to great lengths to try and avoid that happening. But A, because we don't want to lose the patient, and B, the fallout on us personally as well is it's pretty hard to live with, actually. So and they do say, don't they, you know, physician do no harm, first do no harm. And so we should only be doing stuff that, or avoiding doing stuff, the things that could potentially cause harm on the way through. But yeah.
No, I appreciate that, but I have to say I do my best. I mean, Andrew, you were my vet for many years and I trusted you. Never had any complaints. I mean, you never really did very much, actually. I mean, you helped my cat Gremlin. Well, no, you
That's a
did.
ringing endorsement if ever there was one. Yeah, of course
No, no, no.
you
I
did
didn't
very
mean it
much.
like that. I meant you never dipped in an anesthetic, or you never, you know what I mean? Because
No.
I tried to avoid those at all costs, and I still do, you know. But I was with my cat Gremlin once I arrived, didn't I? I mean that, and he had the biggest abscess ever that I think anyone had probably ever seen. It was like bigger than himself. He'd been in
Yeah.
some massive punch up, and the wonderful thing about your practice, you see, was that it was integrative, which I believe is kind of the key to the future of the vet profession, may I say, in my limited capacity here. My vet in Shropshire, Barbara Jones of the Oakwood practice, her practice is integrative. And by
Mm.
that, I mean she can do blood tests, she can do dentals, she can do surgery, but she can also offer homeopathic treatment, acupuncture, herbs as an alternative to medication. And she offers the human client the choice, you know, would you just like to do that or a combination of the two? And that's what
Mm.
you offered me that day with Gremlin, I remember. And I said, no, Andrew, on this occasion, please, can I have antibiotics? Because it was quite a big abscess. But I also gave him homeopathy once I got home. I mean, it's just that I have a massive cupboard full of so many remedies. You'd be quite
Yeah.
impressed, actually, Andrew.
Yes.
But that's part of the CMA investigation, because I've read the government statement, which is online for everyone to read. Part of it is to offer choice.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Choice, perhaps, as to whether you want to spay or neuter your animal. Choice as to what you want to feed your pet on, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in a situation where I've swum against the grain typically for years. You know, I've always fed Molly, who you met, my first miniature bull terrier as a grown-up, was fed on a raw diet. All my animals today are fed on a raw diet. Yes, every single time I go to the practice I go to, it's like a record player. I almost want to say to them, please get the gramophone out now. Can we just put the record on and I'll just sit here and you could just play out the usual thing. What do you feed your dog? No wonder they've got a tummy upset. This and that and this and that. And then with Prudence recently, she has a bit of an issue, which we've talked about. Oh, it's certainly a suspected Alabama rot. She's got
Yeah.
something very strange going on with her back right
Yeah.
leg below the ankle. But, you know, so I went in for that. And the next thing I know, do you know that your bitch is lactating? I said, yes, it's 2 months after she had her season. And
Mm.
this actually happens. It's part of their menstrual cycle, actually. It'll be
Yeah.
gone in 2 weeks. But that had nothing to do with what I was in there. She went in there to have a blood test so that we could actually see how her kidneys were doing.
Yeah, I'll pick you up on something there, because the neutering issue is quite an interesting one. I think you're going to be talking to somebody else in your next edition, but there's such a habit, if you like, almost a cultural habit in this country to neuter cats and dogs. And I think there is evidence, there is quite good evidence out there suggesting that neutering is not always a very good thing to do for the animal. There are significant downsides in some animals, and it's not. Well, now the World Small Animal Veterinary Association has just published their new guidelines that make it abundantly clear that it should not be an absolutely standard thing that happens to every cat and dog, because there are certain situations where it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. And whether that be disease risk, cancer risk, behavioral risk, there's a whole plethora of things which would be good reasons for not neutering a cat and a dog. So, and it's something we do in this country on a slightly hit and miss basis. But you go to other countries and they have completely different cultural habits. You go to Australia, it's pretty much obligatory to have all your dogs neutered. And if you go to some of the Scandinavian countries, it's illegal.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. And we pride ourselves on being an evidence-based profession. And it's some of it is just about social convention.
Yeah, but that's that choice aspect, isn't it? I mean, it's up to the individual owner to decide. We were talking about the WSAVA there. So you know where I'm going on this one, vaccinations. I mean, the WSAVA have made it, as you say, abundantly clear. I like that the need for annual booster shots is basically null and void. That the duration of immunity from puppy shots does last way over this 3-year imaginary number, and most definitely can last a lifetime. Indeed, very much how, certain vaccines that we take as humans, like the polio one, I can't remember which ones I've had, but they similarly last a lifetime. And, this has been researched so much and proved by Schultz and Dr. Jean Dodds, and those two are legends. They fought so hard as professors in their own right to prove this, as over vaccination of course can indeed cause a lot of disease.
I mean, that in itself is contentious, but in my view, there has been a lot of unnecessary vaccination, quite certainly. I mean, we did at our clinic, we did quite a lot of work on this, and we were one of a very small number of clinics that were blood testing dogs, checking for antibodies to see whether they had protection from these diseases or not. And the vast majority of dogs that we tested, we found they still had plenty of antibodies. And we're talking here about distemper, parvovirus, hepatitis. And the vast majority fully protected, not just for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5, 10 years. I remember one standout case. It was a 12-year-old retriever, golden retriever, came in. We blood tested it because it was supposedly booster time. Plenty of antibodies, fully protected, no need for booster. Turned out the dog had had one vaccine when it was 12 weeks old. And this was now later. Now that mean that every single animal is fully protected throughout their entire life. But again, on the principle of to do no harm, if I would argue against vaccinating animals that are already fully protected. So
yes,
strong advocate for blood testing. Blood test first, vaccinate if you have to.
But it's interesting that titer testing, that's the name of the tests that you can do. I've directed some of my wellness clients in that direction to ask their vet, please, can I have a titer test to check my dog's immunity rather than having the booster shot? But there's still, a huge amount of resistance for that, which
a shame.
It was a shame, but it also flies against the grain of, this big, mighty word called science, And that's the thing, vets have to be good at science. But yes, this is do no harm, and the oath. Andrew, what's the oath?
So the oath, on entry into the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, I promise and solemnly declare that I will pursue the work of my profession with integrity and accept my responsibilities to the public, my clients, the profession, and the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons and that, above all, my constant endeavour will be to ensure the health and welfare of animals committed to my care. There you go.
Brilliant. Well, maybe the investment bankers need to read that.
Well, yes, but you see, they're not members of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, so they don't have to comply with it. That's an interesting wrinkle on the whole thing. My personal view, and I don't speak on behalf of anybody other than myself at this point, but my personal view is that the corporate ownership of veterinary practices has been a bit of a disaster, actually. Difficult to roll this one back, though. I can't see how we're going to change that, but I don't see it as having been a huge benefit to animal owners, their pets, or really the veterinary profession. But I might get shot down in flames for saying that.
Well, just another quickie on dosing. I know it's complicated, dosing. Yeah. I queried something, and clearly, as a member of the public, to query something these days is totally unallowed. So this has now created a bit of, shall we say, an awkward situation.
Right.
But I can't understand why a 14-kilo dog was prescribed a very strong antibiotic, down to this back leg situation. Doxycycline. I'm not up on, I know a lot about herbs. I know a lot about homeopathy. When it comes to different types of antibiotics, I haven't got a clue. She's just finished her 3rd course. And for me, that's it. 3rd time lucky. Hasn't totally worked, but I'm not going to go back for more antibiotics now. That's it. We're now going totally herbs and homeopathy to treat whatever this is, because these antibiotics haven't worked. So I think we're not treating the right way. We're treating chemically for something that is a natural thing. And I don't think the chemical and the natural bacteria are kind of gelling, if you know what I mean. This might sound a bit weird. So I think let's go natural, and going with the right natural, it might actually attack the bacteria in an appropriate way that will kill it. But it's just kind of the weird naturopathic vibe I have. But so how come?
Sorry, when you started on this, you were saying you didn't understand how the dosing works, because it seemed like your dog was being prescribed a much higher dose than you would expect from a relatively small size.
Well, yeah, she was prescribed double the dose of this antibiotic that an adult human would take.
Right. Well, the dosing, basically, we dose by body weight, and we have very clear guidelines. I mean, I've got in my hands now the formulary, and the formulary is published by the Small Animal Veterinary Association, and it lists every drug that we might want or need to use in our clinical practice. And for every single one, it tells you the dose rate, and which is the number of milligrams of medicine you need to give for each kilogram of dog. So unless there's been a mistake in the prescribing, what will have happened, and we are encouraged, by the way, not to try and remember all these doses, but actually just to look them up, because there are so many drugs and so many different doses, it's really hard to remember them. It's much better. You have a quick look, bang, and it's 50 milligrams for each 10 kilos of dog or whatever it is. And that's where the dosing comes from. Different animals have different susceptibilities, different sensitivities to certain drugs. So you're quite right. The dosage of some of these medicines may be significantly more or less than those given to people. So it's a variable feast. It does seem a bit odd. It's all part also of the, and this is worth mentioning, the so-called prescribing cascade, that vets are obliged to use a veterinary specific medicine rather than a human medicine if there is a veterinary one available.
I know. Can I interrupt there, though? But you see, I think this drug in dogs, I can't remember what it was called, but it is doxycycline. I mean, all the drugs are human, then they make an animal brand. So it's the same. It's just that I can't remember. It's just in it. Yeah, exactly.
I know. And I've at times had issues with that. And because where these particular medicines are commonly used human medicines as well, we're in this difficult situation where the human equivalent of the medication can be far, far cheaper than the veterinary equivalent. And
Oh, well, hang on. Oh, yes, please, can we go into that? So as part
common sense would say, well, then you use the cheaper option. Of course you would. That would be the natural thing to do.
Hang on, no, we've got to stop here because what Anna's done actually with my journalist hat on. I mean, over the years, I haven't bought that many antibiotics in fairness, and I've just gone, okay, do you know what I mean? But because of this investigation, this time round, so I bought 3 courses in the last 6 weeks. And so I just thought, I'm just going to have a little look, right? So
Yeah.
okay, so I discovered that vets pay £1.38 for 100 tablets, okay, of this aforesaid antibiotic.
Yeah.
I paid, I think it was £67.50 for 12 tablets. And then also recently I've had a tooth abscess. So I've had to buy some human antibiotics for myself, just amoxicillin.
Yeah.
And I bought quite a lot of tablets actually. So I was taking 3 a day for a week. So I don't know what the maths is on that, 21, right?
Yeah.
So I bought 21 tablets for £17.99. So my question would be to you, do you think one way that things could get a little bit better, a little bit more reasonable in the vet profession would be like the NHS has? Because then I've realised that the NHS actually is making a pretty good profit because they also buy tablets for about £1.38 per 100. So they are actually making a profit at £17.99, but not as much, obviously, as the vets. So, you know, my question would be, should there, like there is with the NHS, for people that are earning some money, to pay a flat sort of prescription fee, which would still enable the vet to make quite a lot of profit actually at £17.99 rather than £67.50 for half the amount of tablets.
Yes, I mean, on the face of it, if we are talking about exactly the same brand as well as the same chemical, then that would seem to be, you know, a pretty hefty profit margin and pretty hard to defend.
But these antibiotics, they're all human ones, Andrew.
Yeah.
They're human drugs that are just branded with a different logo for dogs.
Oh yes, absolutely. No, and that clearly is a thing. Now, for medicines to be branded as veterinary medicines, then there is a whole process that has to be gone through. It's the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, which is
but the price is the same, Andrew. You're not answering my question.
Oh, well, what specifically is it? Well, first of all, I would say one of the things you said is the CMA going to be looking at this issue of pricing of drugs in the veterinary profession? And my answer to that would be, I have no idea, but I would imagine yes, because it seems to be an issue that needs some kind of resolution. Yeah, I'm sure they will be looking at it. The ingredient for the medication, which in this case, say I don't know whether we're talking about doxycycline here or not. The doxycycline in the human drug is exactly the same as the doxycycline in the veterinary one.
It's quite funny actually, because I googled doxycycline as to what humans take it for. It's quite funny. I realised it's for sexually transmitted diseases. Well, so I did have a laugh. Because apparently if you've got gonorrhea, then
yes,
that's what you take. Oh dear, Prudence. Oh dear.
Yeah, one of the ones you might take. But in order to get a veterinary license, you have to have a market authorization. You have market authorization holders, and these are pharmaceutical companies who buy the right to be able to sell a generic drug to the veterinary community with a veterinary label on it. And surprise, surprise, they tend to be much more expensive. And we are obliged to use the veterinary medicine, the veterinary labeled one, if there is one. And if there isn't, then there's a whole procedure where we can choose another medicine which is for other species, or another medicine that's a human version, so on and so forth. But we're not allowed to use the much cheaper generic human medicines as the first choice. The argument behind that is that it allows the profit margins to go into the veterinary pharmaceutical companies, which then pays for more research for more medicines. There is some sense and logic to that, but I think given the sort of general absence of transparency about some of these charging issues, I think some of it ends up not being in the best interests of the patient and the patient's owner.
Well, yeah,
Said it.
particularly, yeah, well, yeah, yeah, quite. I mean, you look, no one's got a bottomless pit of cash, that's the thing.
Yeah,
So, I
but
mean,
that's sorry, I don't want to butt in, but I'm going to. And that's not to say that all vets are out there just rampantly profiteering, because actually, overall, most vets are not particularly well paid. Their immediate graduate salaries are not bad, but the salaries don't go up very much unless you take all the risk and set up your own place or get very high in the pyramid. So veterinary salaries are not high. Veterinary nursing salaries are really not very high at all. The problem I see with the change in ownership of the veterinary profession is that you've got all these layers of investors and finance charges and shareholders and management and financial management. Everybody's taking a piece of the pie along the line. And so you still end up with vets who are not particularly well paid, but owners who I think often will report that they seem quite a lot more than they used to.
yeah, it's funny. Someone I'm collaborating with at the moment told me a little anecdote this morning that she had a friend that a long time ago said, yeah, I really want to become a vet because I really admire the sports car that our family vet is driving.
Oh, God.
I know, yeah,
Well,
that was just an anecdote of this morning in conversation. We all know, Andrew, that you work with animals. It's known not to be a big earner. If you want to earn lots of money, go and be a stockbroker or a foreign exchange dealer or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
but working with animals. But that goes back to the beginning of the conversation. You've chosen to be a vet. You surely know roughly what your salary is going to be. Surely you've chosen to be a vet because you want to help animals.
Yes, you have. But equally, we also take on huge responsibility. It's a surprisingly stressful job. Everybody goes, "Oh God, I'd like to be a vet. I'd drive a nice sports car." No, people say, "Oh my God, being a vet, so lovely," and it's true. On a good day, being a vet's fantastic. I remember one of my early bosses in the early days, saying to me, on a good day, Andrew, oh, it's the best job in the world. And she was right. But she said, not every day is a good day. And there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And I think it's reasonable that vets should be decently paid. But I think the problem is that the fees that are being charged are going to an awful lot of other people before they get to the vets. So we get a bad rap on the whole thing. It's sometimes a bit unfair, but there's a lot, in the veterinary profession, as in politics, as in any other thing, there's a lot of progress, there's a lot of work to be done.
Just quickly then, can we just touch on this white coat syndrome?
Oh, yeah.
Because that's something that perhaps upsets me a little bit, and I hear this from lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people, is it's a difference between the conventional practice and the more integrative practice. When you go to see an integrative vet, it's not cheaper, I must say. You go to a holistic vet, I will say this, it's not actually cheaper. It just depends which way you want to go, but you go to a holistic vet and you will spend an hour and a half with them for your first consult, talking
Yeah.
about everything. And they're just absorbing this information and just looking at your dog and talking, about everything from diet to everything. And there's advice being given, perhaps where diet's concerned, if depending on what you've been feeding, and they will switch. It's kind of like going to a conventional vet turned completely upside down. Whereas, now, of course, and again, this will be the investment banking thing, they're on the clock. They've almost got a ringer going, 10 minutes is up. Yeah, you have to leave now. Sorry, bye.
Yeah.
Come back
Yeah.
next week for an update. And you're sort of leaving with your mouth open with words still coming out, but you can't finish your sentence. I mean,
Yeah.
that happens a lot with me, but then I do talk a lot. So,
Well, that's
so I
that's
get
possibly
that.
another factor.
Yeah, I know, I get that. But also, as well, there's this thing that if you are informed, part of everything is kind of suggesting that individual dog owners should be more informed. I mean, I would recommend that all dog owners do my course. But I mean, that was very expensive. And that, well, apparently it's even more now, but it was very expensive 10 years ago.
Yeah,
So it's not in everyone's remit to do that. And it was a lot of hard work and all the rest of it, a lot
yeah,
of study, a lot of exams and these things. But I obviously had a massive, well, it was actually, reaching a point with Molly, my first miniature bull terrier, where I thought, I've got to learn more, right? Because I don't want Molly to die. And I think the
yeah.
only way I'm going to keep her alive is to use myself with knowledge that I have to acquire. And indeed, that did work.
Well, my view on that is that this is, one of the part of the essential skills that makes a good vet is being able to read your clients. We're taught at vet school all about the animal. Quite rightly so. That is the focus. But actually, we deal with our patients through their owners, rather like pediatricians deal with babies and very young children through their parents, because you have to work through an intermediary who knows what's. And so we're very reliant on what an animal's owners tell us about what's going
But
on.
they don't listen, Andrew. They don't listen. I mean, I had a bit of a baptism of fire, having never gone to a totally conventional vet, apart from you, and you're not a totally conventional vet in your
Yeah,
practice. Lise Hanson would come in and do homeopathic consultations, and you were already into raw food feeding. So you weren't a typical practice, which is why obviously you were my vet. Listening, it does not come into it. Listening does not come into it. And unfortunately, recently had my heart broken because of that. And
yeah,
that's where it's a great shame, because listening to the person that has spent the most time with that animal, I
yeah,
feel is absolutely crucial. And that's what the more integrative side does very
yeah,
well.
yeah.
But without that, how on earth can you get a total picture of that animal's health?
Okay,
You
yeah,
might have just moved, and this might be your first. Well, that did happen to me. I'd moved, and so
yeah,
this was my first time. And it was horrendous. And in the end, thankfully, I knew about the Queen Mother Hospital. I was pretty much referring myself to go there, because if
yeah.
I hadn't, Prudence would definitely not be here. We might have to
Sure.
edit some
I
of this
think,
out.
okay, so I will say something around this, because you're absolutely right that listening is critically important. I think there is a problem that a lot of veterinary consultations are far too short. 10 minutes doesn't really give you time much more than to say hello and goodbye with a little tiny bit in the middle. So I think it's very hard to be able to take down the history to find out what the story is in such a short period of time. So I think we should find ways for consultations to be a bit longer. Another factor is that it's surprising how little very many entirely well-meaning pet owners, how little people in general know about medicine and about anatomy and physiology. And it's fine. I mean, they do different things in their lives. There's plenty of things I don't know anything about. But there's probably a danger that once you've got the white coat on, that it's easy to fall into the trap of assuming that your clients don't know very much about medicine and can therefore possibly not be not taken as seriously as they should be. It's an easy trap to fall into. I used to encourage our younger vets and students to really try and listen to what the people are saying and write down some of the actual phrases that people use, because they can be quite illustrative later on. When you go back and look at the notes later and try and figure out what it is that they really meant. And some of those funny phrases that people use to describe their animal's behavior are sometimes quite illustrative when you go back and look at them later. But listening is really important. And they probably don't spend enough time teaching vet students how to do it, actually. Because
Yeah.
it's easy. It's a stressful experience for an animal owner to take their pet to the vet. It's really stressful. You don't know what the problem is. Could it be serious? Is it going to be fatal? Is it going to be expensive? Are they going to pee on the table? Are they going to bite the vet? I mean, there's so many things that conspire to make it stressful and make it much harder for the pet owner to remember everything that the vet may have said to them as well. So it works, it cuts both ways. It's a tough one to run. And to try and do the whole thing from beginning to end in 10 minutes, in my view, is hopeless. Hopeless.
Mm,
Yeah.
No, for sure. No, absolutely. I just think it could all be so much better.
Yeah.
What it could all be so much better.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It could all be just so much better. I'll just say it again. And
Yeah.
that's what I think would be
Well,
great.
I don't know whether you did respond to the Competition Merger Authority request for feedback, but you should do it. You should say your bit because
Oh,
you're.
don't worry. I went on Jeremy Vine and certainly said my bit.
But I mean, your opinion is as important as anybody else's. I mean, and it's important that we take as wide a sampling as possible to try. This is an opportunity to try and fix or to identify where things are going wrong and try and fix them.
Yeah, no, I shall. I
I
mean,
know you will.
yeah, I mean, look, I mean, but this was the thing on Jeremy Vine, right? So they asked if I'd come on and do it, and I was like, oh, gosh, all right. And so, have you got examples of vet bills over quite a wide time frame? And obviously, I have. I'm like a lot, So my thing was okay. So in 2005, a certain operation on moles, at a certain place cost £800, done spectacularly, I have to say. Her life was saved.
Yeah.
The vet actually has gone on to lecture at Cornell University. I was just indebted to him. I would have, if he said, Anna, climb Mount Everest and thanking me, I would have done it, So that was 2005. Roll on 2020, same place, same type of dog, very similar surgery, slightly more complicated, but £8,000.
Yeah, some of the fundamental pricing structures have changed. I'll absolutely give you that. One of the other things that's changed, of course, is that technology has changed dramatically over the last sort of 10, 20 years. And now there was a, much more of an expectation, both by the vets themselves, because that's how they've been trained, and also by animal owners, that everybody will have, all the clinics, the expectation is that clinics will have all the incredible machines that go beep, the kind of things you see in the television programs. And those machines don't come cheap. And I think there may be times when we maybe overdo it and have too many machines and too much technology and too much, and lose some of the human touch, which is the bit about building the bond and helping pet owners realistic expectations, both of the way their pet will behave, what their pet is likely to want to do and will benefit from, but also realistic expectations of health and injury and of the role of the vet. So it comes down to a lot of communication stuff, and I think it's perhaps no surprise that I think there have been surveys done looking at sort of communication skills in vets, and a lot of vets, this might be controversial, but chose to deal with animals because they'd rather deal with animals than people. And
yeah, it's funny because I know.
but at the same time, and we maybe get into that because the puppies and kittens are easier to talk to, but we find ourselves then dealing with people all day, every day, and I think that is a bit of a slight conflict actually for many vets, not for all, of course, but for some, it's you can see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think dog trainers and the like also perhaps feel the same, because
Yeah.
you love working with dogs and have an ability, a natural affinity perhaps with dogs. And 90%, or a lot of the issues are obviously the humans. So that's why it's interesting, to have a human psychology degree,
Yeah.
because a lot of stuff is projected and a lot of
Yeah.
misunderstanding about talking to your dog and eye contact and all these things. Look, I know it's complicated. It's interesting though that, I mean, I know it's stressful, and I know half the vets had to leave after Brexit because they were from mainland Europe. But in mainland Europe, it is a lot cheaper. So people apparently have been going, to France to have their dog neutered if they wanted to,
Yeah.
and it's a lot cheaper there, which is something that puzzles me. I've lived in Paris and I know how expensive it is to live in Paris, probably
Yeah.
more so than London actually.
Yeah.
But the vet bills in Paris are 4 times less than they are in London,
Yeah.
which that's bizarre, right?
Well, yes. Yes, from what I see and hear, I have to say I'm not convinced that the veterinary profession is in a particularly happy place right now. But hopefully this inquiry will help to highlight some of the issues that need to be addressed, and hopefully we'll have some teeth. And because we would all, as vets, like to work in an environment that works for us and our clinical teams, but works well with our clients, works well for the patients. And I think, like many things that change rapidly, it can be quite uncomfortable. And the veterinary profession has changed pretty rapidly over the last 5 to 10 years, and I think it's going to take a while for it to stabilize into a new formula that works well for everybody. Because my impression is that it's not a particularly happy place just at the moment.
Well, let's hope so, Andrew. Look, we've discussed a
On
lot.
that happy note.
Well, yeah, on the happy note, on the up, there's always got to be a positive. And your work that you're doing now, is channeling everything positively. We haven't talked about, but it's all been part of it, this sort of subscription business model and pumping out of flea and worm treatments when, we looked at titer testing as a way to test your dog's immunity. We can, I test my dog's poo to see if they've got worms, and it comes back and it's always no worms, which is interesting for me, because I think, crumbs, what if I'd given them all of these, which I haven't, but given them monthly wormers, blindly, because they never had any worms. So there's that aspect, which you and I have discussed a lot. And that's something, that, you're working on very, very diligently, because of course, all of these things end up in the soil.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I mean, and we do know that a significant percentage of cats and dogs do have worms at any given time. The question for me is, well, is that a problem? So what? I mean, if they have worms but they're not sick, does that matter, actually? The answer to come back that we're often told is that, well, intestinal worms, for example, can be a health problem for people. It's a health risk for people, which is absolutely true. But the word risk itself is meaningless. It's risky for me to cross the road, but I reckon the risk is very low, so I happily cross the road. There is a risk of worms in cats and dogs affecting the health of people, right? I accept that. But if you go to the medical profession, there was a review article in the British Medical Journal just last year looking at this specific issue. And they looked to see how many cases of human illness associated with worms in dogs was. And they found 106 cases, which sounds like, that's probably all my friends and more, and family. 106 sounds quite a lot, but that was over a 46-year period.
Really? Gosh,
So,
really?
Yeah. So this is the British Medical Journal. This is
human.
Yeah, it's human, and it's a very, very reputable document. So it suggests there's about 2.5 cases of human health problems diagnosed and recorded each year. Now, out of 60, 70 million people, that's pretty damn rare. So it's fair enough to say that these worms are a risk to human health. But from what I can see, looking at the data, the risk is so infinitesimally small that it begs the question of, should we be treating all these animals? And the other thing on this as well is that if you then do blood tests on the human population to have a look and see how many people have antibodies, how many people have an immune response to these worms, it's about 10%. It's about 1 in 10, which means there's about 6 or 7 million people in this country who've been exposed to roundworms, have produced an immune response, have antibodies, are immune, and only about 2 out of those 6 or 7 million people actually get sick. That's incredibly rare, unbelievably rare.
So, yeah, gosh, well, kind of takes us back then, doesn't it, to the
CMA.
CMA.
Smoke it.
Well, yeah, it goes back to the CMA then, really. So why on earth, why the dickens are, we recommended to do a flea treatment every month, a wormer every month, when these are strong insecticides that, I mean, which is the one in imidacloprid that, what is it? A teaspoon of the stuff will kill, is it 4 million bees?
It's imidacloprid. It's a neonicotinoid insecticide, and it's commonly used for fleas and other external parasites and lungworm and all sorts. It's in several of the market leading pet parasite treatments out there. And the figure you're looking for is the amount of imidacloprid in a single dose you'd put on, say, a Labrador. So a single dose on a Labrador contains enough active ingredient, it could kill 25 million bees.
25 million?
25 million bees. Yeah.
You know,
now, obviously, that one dose on the Labrador is not going to come into contact with 25 million bees, but these are extremely toxic chemicals.
Well, yes, I know, and I know they're designed to kill things like fleas.
It needs to be proportionate to the treatment needs to be proportionate to the risk.
Yeah, but the radical in me is saying, well, gosh, that's very strong, and I know a Labrador is the size that they are, but surely it can't be just a benign treatment.
Well, that's another whole.
I know. Well, let's save that one for the next episode.
We'll save that for another one. I mean, there is evidence about things like fipronil. Fipronil is one of the ingredients in one of the most common over-the-counter flea medicines that you can buy, whose name I can't mention, but it's it has been widely used. It's banned in agriculture, same as imidacloprid, but it's widely used in the pet trade. And there is evidence out there on the human side that prolonged exposure to fipronil and some of its other metabolites is associated with quite serious disease in people, things like diabetes, blood pressure. These are not benign chemicals. We should be, on my personal view, we should be much, much more careful with how we deal with them.
Yes, I think everyone needs to buy a flea comb for Christmas.
Yeah. A flea comb and a tick hook. Total outlay, probably less than £1.
Andrew, listen, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
That's our show, Mr. Binks. What did you think? Yes, Andrew did give us lots of pause for thought. And you're right, it is time for Woof of the Week. It is indeed a shame that there are so few independent vets left in practice. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please rate and review the show wherever you tune into your podcasts, because it really does make a difference. Thanks again, of course, to retired vet Andrew Prentis for joining us, and all the links to Andrew will be in the show notes. Thanks, of course, to Mike, my producer, for all the music and production as ever. Find out more about him at Pod People UK. Find out more about me at Anna Webb Dogs or on my website, annawebb.co.uk. What's that, Mr. Binks? Yes, we will be back in your feed next Sunday. So go on, why don't you subscribe now? Because it's free, and that way you'll never miss another show. Bye for now.